So we have an enormous Battlegrounds patch coming to Hearthstone today, and I wanted to take a closer look at these cards, both for myself, but also to give you guys a little bit more time to digest all these major changes. Even though I'm not somebody who plays a ton of Battlegrounds regularly, I always jump back in for new content. I want to make sure we're all in a good spot, understanding exactly what these cards are all about, and maybe trying to take a guess at how good they're going to feel. That said, I wanted to start here with the tier 6 minion. This is sort of the finishing piece for a new, I guess I'd call it like a sub-archetype or sub-composition in Battlegrounds. It seems like it's going to be, which is taunt-based synergies. And as you'll see if you didn't already watch the patch notes video I put out, there are a bunch of taunt buff synergy cards that are gonna basically proc buffs and effects off of being attacked, kind of like reverse pirates. Instead of buffing when attacking, these are better on the defensive end. So to kick things off, she's a Divine Shield Reborn minion. So that's 4 bodies that you got to push through with Elistra, because she reads, whenever a friendly taunt minion is attacked, this gets attacked instead. So this is a pretty neat synergy. She's not actually a taunt card herself, notice, so she won't be attacked by default. But if you have a taunt build with other taunt minions, and you say, like, you know, you have a Cave Hydra that you want to play on with Houndmasters, and sometimes that's risky to do because you don't want your Cave Hydra dying before it gets its cleave attack off. So Houndmaster buffs feel kind of weird. With Elistra, it wouldn't matter if your Cave Hydra had taunt, because Elistra is going to interrupt and steal the attack that the Cave Hydra would have received anyway. So buff that Cave Hydra as high as you want with Houndmasters. Elistra is still going to absorb the hit. And if you have enough taunt minions or a full taunt board, she's going to absorb essentially the first 4 hits of the fight. That can do a couple of things. That can protect high-value assets on board, like those Cave Hydras, Cleave Minions, whatever else, poisonous stuff, whatever it might be. Can help protect, those zap attacks, because presumably she's going to overwrite zap. I don't know exactly how that'll work, but I think she will. So you can kind of protect stuff on board. Alternatively here, you've just got a way to help proc and protect for your other taunt synergy cards. And of course, you can give Elistra taunt as well. So if you have things that are based on taunt minions being attacked, drop a Defender of Argus on her, and suddenly she's also benefiting from all that other stuff. I don't know exactly what happens if you have 2 taunted Elistras. They could bounce off of each other. Potentially, I think they'd probably just resolve once, and the initial Elistra would still get attacked. So she'd push it to the second one, the second one would push it back to her, and it would resolve there, but we'll have to see it in game. So regardless, you just got this super sticky body that's going to help you proc all these other synergies, and I think it could still exist as a bit of a tech card beyond that as well. Just, you don't have anything else to put in your build. This is a nice, sticky, defensive card that really disrupts your opponent's game plan, forces them to attack into something they may not want to, like doing things like popping their Divine Shield minions early on 4 smaller bodies. And at the end of the day, remember, she's also just like 28 total attack, because there are 4 7 attack minions here. Unlike your little reborn Divine Shield dragon, who's going to get resummoned as, 2 or maybe 4 attack if golden, she's coming back as 7 attack. So she's still meaningful. That does add up over time as well. So I think it's a really cool minion, and I'm excited to see exactly how this one gets played around and played in certain Battlegrounds builds. All right, so next up here, we're going to jump into the other taunt synergy cards and start to piece together how this taunt build could work. This is the Karaji Harbinger, a tier 4 taunt synergy minion. He's a 5/5 by default, so decent body there. And after friendly minion with taunt dies, this will give its neighbors +2/+2. So this is another card without taunt, but it seems like a lot of this is going to be Defender of Argus based, where you're kind of giving everything taunt to help realize some of these buffs. But this is one you don't necessarily want to have taunt and don't want it dying right off the bat, because it starts adding buffs. So if you have 3 or 4 taunt minions on board, theoretically, right, this is going to buff 3 or 4 times. That's something like, 6/6 or 8/8 buffs throughout the round of a combat. Could scale even higher, of course, as well. So Karaji Harbinger gives you a potential big spike on board. Now, this is all in combat, right? These aren't permanent buffs. This isn't happening in the tavern phase. So I do have some concerns about the scalability of this long term. This feels like something maybe you just put in a pinch because you have a taunt minion or 2 in your build naturally. Anyway, you kind of finish off a turn with this one because it's going to be a little bit of a buff. Sometimes you see that, like, instead of a Cobalt Scalebane, it's going to give like +3 permanent buff. Maybe you want that shorter term infusion of +4/+4 instead of, you know, like a +3. And you just kind of finish off a build with your Karaji Harbinger and things work out. Because I just don't know if this is going to scale well enough. If it's golden, you could certainly see it scaling more. You know, you got 4 or 5 things dying on board. In gold, you're looking at, you know, 20/20 buff all of a sudden, and this starts to feel like it's worth it. But otherwise, I still have some questions about just if this one gets there or keeps up with the build. Essentially, it feels more like an in a pinch solution as opposed to a build around or core element to me. So moving on here, we've got the other side of things. This is the Champion of Yashiraj, another tier 4 taunt synergy minion. It's a 2/2 by default, but this one scales really nicely, I think. It reads, whenever a friendly taunt minion is attacked, gain +1/+1 permanently. So although those buffs are happening in combat as well, they're also resolving and staying through to the tavern phase. These are permanent buffs resolving in combat, which is cool. We haven't seen a lot of that in Battlegrounds. So this one's potentially going to get really big, right? Because think about like our first card, Elistra, right? That's if you give her taunt, which she doesn't have by default, that's 4 attacks right there. This gains +4/+4 immediately in combat, and it's keeping that as well. And if you get this early enough in a game, and you have like 4 or 5 taunt minions, this is going to start building up pretty quickly. And think, not all taunt minions die when getting attacked. If they're big enough, or if they have divine shields, then they could each get attacked multiple times, which means your Champion of Yashiraj is sort of uncapped, right? If your opponent has like a lot of token minions, they get 6 1/1s that all attack into a taunt. That's an extra 6/6 in buffs right there on your Champion of Yashiraj. So you could envision some worlds where this scales really nicely. And then, of course, in Golden, it's going to scale even more. So it just kind of depends on how the lobby's playing out, the opponent, how quickly this one's going to get there. It's a little bit less reliable, I guess, in some ways than other scaling cards we've seen. Think like Golden Grubber, for instance, right? Golden Grubber is, you know, you're controlling it. You can kind of foresee exactly what's going to happen with it. This one could backfire. Your opponent could snipe your big taunt right off the bat, kill it instantly with a poisonous, and maybe you only get that +1/+1 instead of expecting, you know, 3 or 4 attacks out of it. So a little bit more unreliable, but still I think a lot of potential for this one to get pretty big. It feels like you kind of need to see this in the game to know exactly how it's going to work. But nonetheless, pretty interesting. Plus, if you do give this taunt, by the way, it will be a friendly taunt minion. It does not say other taunt minions. So this can scale off of itself as well. So there's a bit of a positive feedback loop there, where if you give this taunt, it gets big, it gets attacked multiple times. That's amazing to help it grow even faster and accelerate that growth. So some potential there as well. So moving on here to the tier 3 taunt synergy card, it's Arm of the Empire, which is hilarious because she has like a mutated arm. I think it's great. She's a 4/5, so pretty nice body there for tier 3. And she reads, whenever a friendly taunt minion is attacked, give it +3 attack. So this is a way to help your taunt minions essentially scale up in combat and make sure you're, you know, competitive, essentially taking trades defensively with your opponents. You have 1 or 2 of these on board, you're going to get quite a bit of extra attack. But again, this is not a permanent scaling. This is only in combat. This is not making your minion stronger over time, just in that immediate sense. And I have the same concern here a little bit for Arm of the Empire in that regard as our previous non-permanent card, where it's like, I just don't know if this is going to do quite enough long term. But I don't know if you could build around this and really refine a build out of it. It feels again more like a sort of in a pinch solution as opposed to that long-term build around. And that makes me nervous. I don't know if it's going to be enough for taunt minions to get there. If you compare this to, say, like Pack Leader even, right? Pack Leader is adding those attacks to beasts forever. And, you know, you're replaying them as they get golden, and you're just scaling up a ton off of a small Pack Leader. This isn't doing that. It's a bigger body by default. It's got some other upsides, sure. Maybe taunt builds are actually a little bit more aggressive and like just winning mid-game boards more reliably, but I just don't feel like it's as relevant. Plus, scaling the attack on this doesn't really feed back into itself very well because the taunt minion is not any extra survivable, basically. So it's not issuing like extra attacks to sort of like double the attack value here. If it's just getting attacked once because it dies, it's only getting that +3. It's not surviving and attacking, you know, for another +3 essentially, or dealing an additional +3 damage. So there's some concerns there as well. Again, like, yeah, it makes a ton of sense with Elistra, right? Like Elistra would be amazing with this because she'd go to 10 attack, or, you know, if you get this golden, which is very reasonable, she'd go to 13 attack. She's still alive because she had Divine Shield, and she maybe goes back to 19 attack. Like, that's pretty crazy once you get Elistra in play, but you have to give Elistra Taunt, number one, which isn't that easy to do in Battlegrounds. So anyway, it feels like it might be awkward. It's hard to envision this one really making that super significant impact. But again, it's hard to envision all this coming together at all. So next up here is the Tormented Ritualist, another Taunt synergy minion. It's a tier 2, 2/3, has Taunt, which is great. So it can kind of feed back into all that other stuff. And it reads, whenever this is attacked, give adjacent minions +1/+1. So you can kind of throw in this little speed bump. Your opponent has to attack into this, and it feeds in additional stats into higher value things you care about. Put some Divine Shields around it, some Cleaves, etc. And you've got yourself basically 4-5 in stats for tier 2, which is pretty solid if you have enough minions to utilize that in the early game. And this one's not going to scale super well again because it's not permanent, and you know, the +2/+2, even when this is golden, isn't probably going to keep up very well even into the mid game. So this feels like something you might replace. Plus, you know, as a taunt minion, it doesn't have the scalability of other type cards that are getting buffs and so on and so forth. So it's probably going to get dropped off pretty quickly, but you could imagine this being a nice filler card in, but that's kind of a base taunt build, or maybe just in any build, this could still work nicely. Just, I need a 2-drop. This one's pretty solid, and I think this card will actually see a fair bit of play for that very reason. It doesn't have to be a taunt synergy card. I think it's just a solid flex spot card. And then finally for the taunt minions here, we've got the Acolyte of Cthulhu, a tier 1 2/2 with Taunt and Reborn. And this is a cool little guy to kick off taunt stuff if that's your game plan, because there's 2 taunt bodies here. Again, kind of a way to get in your opponent's game plan and disrupt them a little bit by having to attack into this really annoying little guy twice before they really do anything else significant. That's really cool. Can help proc some of those taunt buffs we've seen elsewhere. That's nice. Also, probably just a reasonably good tier 1 unit as well. Can trade into various things nicely. Can even beat a Vulgar tie, at least a Vulgar Homunculus on tier 1, which is pretty rare. Not many things can do that. So will be great at winning combats. It's not as good as tokens, probably still at tier 1 because you don't get that gold advantage out of it. But certainly for some heroes and some positions, you could imagine this being a great choice. And it's even better than some like tier 2 non-synergistic things. So you might even buy this occasionally on your 5 gold or 6 gold turn because there wasn't a great tier 2 option. You know, you don't need a Scavenging Hyena. So the Acolyte of Cthulhu is just a little bit better in those cases. So I think this card will be in a lot of early game builds. It's got that same issue, though, for taunt stuff. Is like, does this make it into the late game? I don't see how it keeps up and it makes any relevance. But you could see it as a tech card as well, just to really get in the opponent's way with multiple small taunts, popping a couple Divine Shields early, so on and so forth. So a pretty neatly designed little taunt card here. So moving on to our non-taunt cards. There's a handful of other things here as well that don't play around taunt specifically, like Mithrax the Unraveler here, new tier 5 unit. He's a 4/4 by default, and at the end of your turn, he'll gain +1/+2 for each minion type you control. So I'm kind of taking this as a reverse Light Fang Enforcer. Instead of Light Fang, which is buffing out the rest of your board, this guy's sort of absorbing extra buffs and scaling himself, which is a great way to make a big minion pretty quickly, right? Like, he's basically a Razor Gore for Menagerie instead of specifically for dragons, but he scales better because he's got the +2 health aspect, which is really rather important. It's going to make him a nice sticky threat, I think, in some cases. The only challenge here is because he doesn't have a minion type. If you're committing to a Menagerie style play, whether that's through Light Fang or through a Bran, he is occupying a board spot that could be a minion type that could absorb buffs. But there's this sort of like limited Menagerie with Bran where you're playing a lot of jugs and mugs, and you only maybe need like 3 minion types on board, and this scales a little better. Maybe you go to 4 or 5 or whatever, right? And this is a better filler spot. So maybe not as good with Light Fang because it kind of takes up one of those slots for Light Fang. But it is noteworthy that the average Battlegrounds match is going to have 5 minion types, minus Amalgadon, of course, which can flex into the 6th spot. So if you have a Light Fang and you have 5 minion types, this could be your 7th minion, it just kind of locks in your board. You don't have the flexibility to play buff cards or anything else. So I don't know how well that's going to work, because you got the Light Fang and this is your 6th and 7th slots. So it might be awkward there. So it's interesting to have a minion that's kind of co-scaling with Light Fang, but keep in mind, if it's Light Fang, it could be any other minion type and it would gain. So, it's interesting. I think this could exist as like an alternative to Light Fang or Brand. If you don't find those, you just plop this down and you're happy to have something that's scaling a little better. But I don't know that a Menagerie build makes enough sense in that regard. Like a 1 minion carry here might not be enough to get that off the ground. I think you have to have some other way to make that Menagerie build work. So this feels like a complementary piece as opposed to a replacement. I don't know if it's a strong enough fit as a complementary piece. It seems like it could be awkward. That said, I'm really excited to try this one, especially if you like gold in it. It's going to get really big, really fast, which I think is super cool. So particularly those health totals are gonna get giant. So that should be pretty fun to see. So Mithrax looks like a really cool card. I also just love his art and design. It looks awesome. So I'm excited to give this one a shot, but I'm not as hopeful as I think I should be. So next up at the tier 5 slot is the Faceless Tavern Goer. This is a really cool card. Basically, it's like a flex card. It's a 4/4. It's Battlecry chooses a minion in Bob's Tavern. Then that transforms into a plain copy of it. So if you have the board space, this basically allows you to triple off of 2 minions. So say you've got a Brand, a great example. You buy this in anticipation of finding a second Brand, and boom, you got your golden Brand ready to go, because this turns into the Brand in the shop, and that's 3. You don't have to find the 3rd natural Brand. And if it's not Brand, if it's Light Fang or whatever other crazy build around you absolutely need, it only demands that you find 2 of them instead of a 3rd one. So this basically increases the consistency of finding goldens at tier 5 plus. I mean, God, you could do it at tier 4 too, of course. Cave Hydra, whatever. I don't know why I'd golden the Cave Hydra, but you get the idea. So, I think this minion might have really sleeper giant implications about how late game Battlegrounds unfolds, because it means it's going to be so much easier to get those golden build around cards and just start going bonkers with builds, because now you need to only find, basically it doubles your odds of finding that 3rd minion, right? So instead of having to find the 3rd Nomi, you can find the 2nd Nomi, and then you can either find a 3rd Nomi or just a Faceless Tavern Goer. And the thing is, you can bank the Faceless Tavern Goer as well. Anytime you see one, you can buy it in anticipation for when you're going to find that 2nd card, and then boom, you're good to go. So I think a lot of people are going to have crazy golden build-arounds because of the Faceless Tavern Goer way more often than they used to, which is going to make the late game, I think, just go nuts. This card seems really, really important in how it could unfold. So I think it'll be very commonly seen. I mean, you won't actually ever see it, on board or anything, but it'll be commonly utilized, and will make a giant impact on Battlegrounds as far as I'm concerned. Moving on here to the Big Fernal, a tier 4 demon synergy card. He's a 4/4 by default, and he reads, after you summon a demon, gain +1/+1 permanently. So pretty interesting shift here on demon scaling. Right now, for big demon builds, you've got like Floating Watcher that's going to make you a giant demon, and your Wrathweaver. And obviously those go together. You take damage, you get some big dudes on board. This moves things in a slightly different direction. So Big Fernal can still scale in the same way that Wrathweaver does, by just playing demons in the shop phase and getting a +1/+1 bigger. Well, Wrathweaver gets +2/+2, but you get the idea. He's getting slightly larger when you play demons in the shop. But the more important aspect of Big Fernal is that because it says permanently, he also scales during combat. So this gives token demon builds that have historically relied on soul jugglers and things like Mal'Ganis buffs and just lots of bodies through Void Lords. This gives them a way to make a big minion on board as well, and better define that big carry unit alongside, say, like a Wrathweaver, which I think is a big deal and potentially a Big Fernal deal. But I think it makes token demon builds very scary, because now if you have, say, Imp Gang Boss, Void Lord, whatever other token synergy demon thing, Big Fernal's getting big not only immediately, but he's scaling a lot. You could summon 6-7 demons throughout the course of a fight pretty reliably, I think. And that means your big Fernal's gaining 6/6 around, maybe more in the shop phase. This guy's going to get really big really quickly, particularly if you make him golden. It seems totally nuts. So this is definitely a card to keep an eye on. I think Soul Jugglers are really close. They just needed that like linchpin carry card, and Big Fernal becomes that. So suddenly that's a very viable build on top of just like normal big demon stuff, which is very good already. And you know, this could be a big demon solution as well. This could just be a smaller version of Wrathweaver and Floating Watcher to increase the consistency of having something that scales in those builds as well. So all in all, I think a really important card that's going to make demons rather frightening. Moving on here is the Warden of Old, a tier 3 3/3 with Death Rattle, add a golden coin to your hand. So we have here an economy card that's not just like a one-time economy card like we've seen for a lot of our other economy cards in Battlegrounds. This one, because it's turning the combat Death Rattle into a golden coin, if you keep it for multiple turns, it really can add up to a lot of gold value over time, especially if you gold in this where it's giving you 2 gold coins. So basically after 2 rounds, this pays for itself because it's selling for 1. You got the 2 gold coins that made it free, help you fill in a board. We've already got the pirate that does a similar thing. But if you keep this longer, you're going to start realizing a nice economy bonus. Now the question is, can you keep this in play for a long time without losing too many rounds? But if you are able to successfully manage that and balance it, that risk reward there, you might get a big payoff, like take for the giant swing turn, tearing up early, finding some crazy build around, and then Warden of Old paid for itself because you flip the game so hard you start to just dominate everybody while losing maybe a few rounds here or there. And, you know, it is a 3/3 at tier 3, so it's not especially strong as a combat minion. So there is a price to pay there. So it's going to be really intriguing. I think good players will be able to utilize this card to great success to turn it into money and riches and, you know, just victories. I think average players might fall in the trap here a little bit and take too much damage and lose. But I'm going to lose trying to play the Warden of Old to make it work, especially in Golden. I think that sounds like a really cool payoff. So I'm excited to give this one a shot. I think cards like this are great to exist in Battlegrounds. All right, so moving on to the new system here. I'm not going to talk about these in a ton of detail. Number 1, because it's just like a million different cards. And number 2, because it's just so dependent on games and builds and heroes. It's just hard to envision any individual card and kind of measure its impact in a given game. So this is the new Darkmoon Prizes system. And Darkmoon Prizes are essentially rewards you're going to discover every 4 turns in Battlegrounds. So these are the ones, for instance, you'll get offered after turn 4. 3 of these will pop up on your screen. You'll choose the one you want, and that'll be a spell that you can play at a given moment. Whether that's immediately or later is perhaps up to you, but still offer you great ways to kind of reshape what your Battlegrounds game is going to look like. And I mean, clearly these are going to have major implications about how games are played. I can't even begin to envision it because some of these get absolutely nuts at higher tiers. But for tier 1 here, you've got basically a handful of economy manipulation cards, some short-term buffs potentially, because on turn 4 you're probably not going to have, you know, late game minions already. So just buffs for now. You've got stuff like the good stuff that's giving every minion in the shop +1 health for the rest of the game. So some scalability there potentially, or at least late game benefit. And stuff like New Recruit, which I think is actually probably the strongest option here, it seems to me at least, which adds a minion to Bob's Tavern for the rest of the game. Essentially, that's going to increase your choices and help you refine builds better than any of these other options. So moving on to the cards you get offered after turn 8. These are even crazier, and some of these seem really big, like rules. You got a minion that's just going to scale +2/+2 at the end of your turn. That's a big deal if you already have like a Cleave minion or Divine Shield minion. Which by turn 8 is not that crazy unreasonable, right? You got Brand's Blessing, which allows you to take just a gigantic, just crazy blow up turn. If you don't have a Brand, you can still do that early, which is nice. Stuff like Evolving Tavern can help you find some key minions early. This is the stage where I'd already start getting wary of things that have a really long-term upside, just because games don't always go crazy long beyond turn 8. Like if you're already at the bottom of the lobby, taking something like Great Deal, for instance, probably isn't going to help you. You need something that's going to offer you some short-term strength, so maybe the Bouncer makes more sense instead. And that's why it's really hard to judge these cards, because you can't imagine an average scenario necessarily It's just so dependent on game states, heroes, etc. So moving on to turn 12, you've got stuff like Ice Block here, and it's been said that Ice Block can only be offered once per game, so not like 3 people are going to get Ice Blocks, and that just ruins it because the whole lobby's just not dying when they're supposed to. But you got crazy stuff like I'm still just a rat in a cage, doubling a minion's attack. Imagine that on a big Divine Shield or Cleave minion. That's absolutely crazy. But you're not going to get it every time, so you can't play towards that necessarily. You can discover a tier 6 minion. I mean, turn 12 is already really late game in most Battlegrounds games, at least I play. So there aren't too many rounds left, and you need something that's probably going to help a lot. Like Buy the Holy Light with a Divine Shield might just be the go-to play because you got some awesome minion you want to protect. But some very, very strong stuff here. And then finally, the turn 16 options. I mean, a lot of games don't even go to turn 16 in my experience. So this is almost always like the final couple people, the final fight, maybe two, if there's been some ties and stuff. But really crazy strong cards. Stuff like Raise the Stakes, make a friendly minion golden, and return it to your hands. Not only do you get the golden upside, but you get to discover something as well. Big Winner just gives you multiple prizes from the previous turns, which I don't know if that's actually that good. Most of them aren't that crazy. Argent Braggart's just nuts because it's, if you have a 50-50 on board, guess what? You just get a free 50-50 Argent Braggart, which is crazy. So these are pretty nuts. I don't think you're going to see these often, but man, they are going to help turn the tide. And trying to guess what your opponent's going to pick as well can make a big deal as well. So really, really fun system here at Darkmoon Prizes. And then finally, we also have some new heroes, the Old Gods. The rest of the Old Gods being introduced here. We got N'Zoth, who's going to give you a 1/1 fish that gains death rattles throughout combat. Basically, you put this at the end of your board. You get a bunch of token summons and divine shields and buffs or whatever else. Fish and N'Zoth's going to unleash all of that when he dies, which it definitely could be big if you have, multiple 8/8 dinosaurs coming out of this because you got Mechano Eggs on board. Like, yeah, that's a big deal. Fish and N'Zoth has some pretty nutty synergies. But the thing is, as with all of these heroes that are like very defined and have a niche play style, it's hard to make it work because it's like, well, I'm stuck with this 1/1 fish. If I don't hit good death rattle stuff in the early game in particular, it might just overwhelm you. I mean, a free 1/1's not necessarily bad for the first few rounds of the game. That could help you win a combat here or there. But as you get into the early to mid game, it's like, man, if I don't have any death rattles, can I even keep this on board? Do I have to sell it? And then it's like, oh, I don't really have a hero power anymore. So imagine without, mechs, it's like, well, maybe you don't pick N'Zoth in that scenario, right? Because you have a choice. But it just feels like a hero that's going to be very situational, very limited in how often it makes sense. Despite the fish potentially being an awesome high value piece, it just takes a while to make that work. And I think that's really risky in Battlegrounds. So here we got a buff with Cthulhu. It's 2 gold. It reads at the end of your turn, give a friendly minion +1/+1. And then that will repeat each time for each time you've played this hero power. So early in the game, this is going to feel pretty bad, spending 2 gold for +1/+1. It's like, ugh, that's miserable. But if you commit to this and you're playing it every turn, I mean, by the time you get to the late game, this might be, 2 gold, give something 10/10, which for 2 gold feels like that's a pretty good payoff. That said, I think the economy on this is just too punishing along the way. If I compare this to Ragnaros, say, like Ragnaros is giving stuff 8/8 and he's done it for free. Like, yes, it's delayed, but I didn't have to spend 16 gold along the way to get the same effect. That's a lot of gold to commit. And yes, of course, you're getting some buffs too, but the thing is, right, you're not always keeping early game minions. You might be selling those buffs off. You might be playing suboptimal minions to hold on to those buffs. There's a handful of problems with that game plan. So to me, I think this is just going to be too punishing from an economy standpoint to make sense. I don't know that the payoff late is worth enough. 1 gold, I mean, I think this would probably be too powerful. That would be just crazy strong. But at 2, I just can't imagine wanting to spend that much gold. So I guess we'll see if it makes any sense. All right, so next up here is Yasharaj, another 2 gold hero power here. And this one is interesting. At the start of combat, it's going to add a minion from your tavern tier to your warband, and then you're going to keep that minion. So I think the ideal use case for this is you're on 5 gold, you buy a minion, you hit Embrace Your Rage, start of combat, you get a random 2-drop added in, and you keep that 2-drop. So Basically helps you fill in some gaps there. But beyond that, I just don't know when I'm playing this, right? How often are you going to want to sell a minion at the end of a shop phase and hit this button and get something just totally random at your tier? I mean, occasionally, yeah, it's going to be a home run because you're going to get like some insane, tier 5 build around that you just desperately needed, or it creates a triple or whatever. But most of the time, you're going to get some like strong shell scavenger added into your combat, and you're like, what the heck? And then other times, you're not going to want to leave a board spot open. You're going to have 7 minions that you like, and you're going to be stuck with a hero power that does nothing. And at 2 gold, again, this seems really expensive to me. So, I mean, it's kind of like a 1 gold hero power, right? Because you could always sell that extra minion, and occasionally, there's other upsides to that. But I just, it seems so inconsistent and unpredictable and unreliable. Like, who's ever really going to want to hit the button? How often is it going to be good? I'm just not really seeing the value in this hero power. It feels prohibitively expensive and awkward to me. Somebody tell me why this one's good, because I don't really get it. And that's it for the new Battlegrounds stuff. Man, a ton of stuff here. Battlegrounds is going to be a totally different game. It's kind of scary how many changes there are, because the Darkmoon Prizes in particular, a handful of really key minions, just a lot of extra taunt stuff added into the pool makes a big difference. This is going to be a very different game. So excited to see how all of this unfolds. And of course, we'll be playing some Battlegrounds to test out all this new stuff. I am not now a Battleground streamer, but always love jumping in when there's new cards and new things to experience. So stay tuned for some more Battlegrounds action in the near future. That said, if you have thoughts of these cards, if you disagree with me, if you agree, whatever it is, share all those in the comments below. I'm always excited to hear your guys' thoughts. But until then, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.
Step aside. Be purged!